In tonight's Government Insider, the paper lobby. A group of lobbyists in Washington are trying to discourage agencies from going digital. Will they be successful? For insight, we turn to our next guest tonight on Capitol Insider, Lisa Rein, reporter for the Washington Post. Lisa, as we know, in this town there are all sorts of groups lobbying for their cause, but a paper lobby, what is that and how much support do they have?
Well, it turns out that the paper lobby represents paper manufacturers, envelope manufacturers whose bottom line has really been threatened by the digital revolution. And if you think about the Postal Service, I mean, look how many fewer envelopes are being sent every year. It's pretty drastic as people have stopped writing letters. So there are various federal agencies, the Social Security Administration, the FDA, and now the Securities and Exchange Commission, that are trying to go digital and trying to communicate with taxpayers digitally. And in the SEC's case, they have a proposal to send mutual fund shareholder statements, allow these companies to send the statements online, and more frequently, but online. So in exchange for doing this, the companies would send these statements basically 12 times a year instead of the 2 times they now send them. But the paper lobby is going to lose a lot of money from this. So there's a group called Consumers for Paper Options that is kind of what they go under. And what they're saying is, look, a lot of people still don't have computers and they don't necessarily get their information on the internet.
This is so fascinating. Who would have thought, because it's ecologically, it's green, it's everything. We don't want to kill trees, although these major paper companies, they harvest their own trees, so they expect to have this ongoing business of making paper. Now, you mentioned a second ago, let's talk more about the SEC. The paper lobby has gone after several federal agencies before. Now, as you said, they've set their sights on the Securities and Exchange Commission. Tell me more about what they want to do.
Right. So the SEC is trying to encourage mutual fund companies, and there are so many of them, and basically encourage them to send their statements to shareholders 12 times a year instead of the current 2 times a year. And so in exchange for, what would be a huge cost to the companies, an additional cost to the companies for sending these statements by snail mail, which is basically now how it's done, the SEC is saying to the industry, the mutual fund industry, okay, you can now put these statements on your website. But it turns out that the paper industry, which has teamed up with a couple of well-known consumer groups, has written hundreds of comments on the website of the SEC, because when you propose a new regulation, you take comments for a couple of months. And there are about 300 comments up there now from people who, many of them are elderly people, but many of them are also, industry representing the executives for the paper industry.
I get these same shareholder reports in the mail, as so many of us do, and they're thick. There's a lot of paper, and it gives the Postal Service business as well. So you really hit 2 major issues on the head. The federal government has been moving toward a more tech-savvy, paperless process, as we all know. So is the paper lobby fighting a losing battle here? What do you think will happen at the SEC?
I think ultimately, they are fighting a losing battle, but not 100% yet. I think because the government is right now in this transition, right, where Social Security earning statements, these for decades and decades went out once a year to taxpayers to say, okay, this is what is in your pot of Social Security money. So what the paper lobby actually managed to do in that case, which this was about a year and a half ago, is get a couple of congressmen to slip a measure into an appropriations bill that basically said, look, you've got to slow down. You've got to give people a very easy way. If they opt in to keeping their paper earnings statements, you have to do that. And so that's what the Social Security Administration is now doing.
That's funny, because I'm don't want to see those forms. I want to have them and hold them and file them. So some things I want on paper. The Social Security statement's one of them. So that's an interesting point you raise.
Absolutely. So I think what the paper industry is doing now is it's slowing the government's move to go completely digital, and it's giving people an option to actually check a box and say, no, I still want paper.
Fascinating stuff. All right, let's switch gears. You wrote an article highlighting the top 5 reasons federal managers fail to fire their low performers. One of them was that those in charge feel they need evidence of poor performance beyond a reasonable doubt, but that's not necessarily the case. Tell us more.
Right. So this was guidance put out by this very small but important agency in the government called the Merit Systems Protection Board. And they issue policies, for sort of what personnel practices can go on in government. And they also protect whistleblowers. They also hear cases when people who work in government have been wrongly fired or demoted. They're sort of like the tribunal for the government in these cases. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a lot of, action in Congress right now over the question of firing employees and whether federal employees really can be fired and how easily they can be fired. So in this case, managers, what this little board is saying is, managers actually have more authority than they may think. And so when you move to fire someone, the way the law works is that the manager actually needs to make a case that that there is a preponderance of evidence, and that actually is not as high a standard, as people think it is. And so this is a case where managers probably have more authority that they really don't use, and of course it's a very complicated issue because employees have so many due process rights.
Right.
And as they should in many ways. It's just a very politicized issue.
2 important issues, the paper trail for personnel matters and the paper lobby, both of them we're talking about tonight on Capitol Insider. Lisa Rein, reporter for the Washington Post. Thanks so much, Lisa.
You're welcome. Thank you.